Hey guys, welcome to Fun Agile. We are starting to do interviews with Agile JIRA professionals, and this is the first one. I'm super excited. Joining me is Alex Ortiz, founder of ApeTech YouTube channel. I love the channel. He's doing amazing JIRA tutorials. His nickname is Dr. JIRA, so he definitely knows what he's talking about. Um, and has a background in project management, software engineering, and deep understanding in JIRA and Agile. Today we're going to answer some of the most common questions about JIRA and Agile you guys have, and of course we're going to talk about Alex's journey. So, Alex, welcome.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for I didn't know I was the first one. I wish I would have known, and then I probably would have I don't know, not being so nervous, but I am very, very nervous. But
Okay,
thank you very much for bringing me on.
yeah, you could probably wear a tie next time
I know,
and
yeah, I would have
stuff.
gone all
Yeah,
out.
yeah. Well, it's okay. It's okay. I'll definitely forgive you. People will be fine. So I want to start with I gave you a questionnaire that I give everybody on my other podcasts, and the one of the questions I ask is to share a story that you never shared before, and I'll give you a prompt, and then you can go from there. So you transitions from Jira admin to project manager back to Jira admin. So it's an interesting story. Tell me about it.
Yeah. So I started my life as a Jira administrator, and I joined a team, and I basically was they're like, "Here's Jira, go figure it out." I never used Jira before, and I learned it really quickly. I was on data center. And the thing that was super interesting was that as I got better at it, as I learned about it, my manager at the time, he had deployed, like he had set up Jira for the very first time in that company. So we weren't really allowed to like get creative with solutions, or we weren't allowed to get creative with anything. It had to be like his way or the highway. And so after about a year or so of struggling of like just constantly hitting butting heads, I switched over to like project management. And then when I was a project manager, I had to use Jira. And so I was like, wait, I know how to use Jira really, really well. And I'm learning this whole project management stuff. So I started tweaking Jira. I started tweaking our Jira so that it would be more efficient for the things that project managers were interested in the place where I worked. And that worked out really well. But boy, oh boy, are there a lot of like as a project manager, you people problems are really, really big, right? There's not a lot of technical problems, but the people problems, those can be really challenging. So after a few years of doing project management, I was like, well, what if I went back to Jira, but this time not somebody else's Jira? Like, what if I went back and I kind of came in like a coaching world? And the story and the point of the story that I wanted to make was I remember being a Jira admin, but feeling like I was not a very good admin because I had a follow somebody else's vision, somebody else's interpretation of how of what good was. But when I came in as a consultant, I took a lot more ownership, right? And I was doing the exact same job. And I almost feel like all over that whole period, I was doing Jira pretty much consistent and similar that whole period of my life. But when I went into consultants and to being a consultant, that's when like people respected my skills as a Jira admin. That's when people were not asking me for to do work, to do just tedious work, but rather asking for my advice, for my opinions, for guidance, for coaching, right? And like again, I feel like for the last 7 years, I have been doing the same job, but just the different, environment that I'm in with the expectations that come, it has made the job much more enjoyable. So I want to share that story of like if you feel like undervalued or underappreciated, you might just not be in the right environment. You might just need to kind of change or alter the team that you're on or the company that you're at because where you might not feel again appreciated as a Jira admin, a different team or a different company might really really value your skills because you might just bring something new to the table that they didn't know about before. That was kind of my journey and kind of like what eliminated my imposter syndrome.
Amazing. So I guess the follow-up question to this will be, what are some of the most common mistakes you see companies make when they start using Jira and how to avoid them?
Yeah, so the very first one, and I think this is not a fault of the companies, but rather more of a fault of Atlassian, is when a company first jumps into the Jira bandwagon, they're coming in from one of two camps. And so I'm going to focus on this first camp first. And so the first camp is they're coming into Jira Cloud because everybody uses Jira, And any simple Google search when you're looking for an agile based project management tool, there's only going to be one option, like honestly, right? There's a couple of others, but you really only want to be in Jira. And so the biggest mistake that I see is that companies just, they'll go to Atlassian.com, they try Jira software, but Atlassian like pipes you into these team managed projects because they want you in. They want you being effective in 30 seconds or less. And I think it's efficient. It's great when you have a team of 7, 10 people. But the moment you start bringing on 20, 30, 50, 100, 200, 500, 1,000, these team managed projects don't scale. They just don't work for a real company, right? A real mature, bigger company. And I think that's probably the biggest mistake is that by the time they realize that they've gone down a path of that's not scalable, it's expensive to turn. It's a bigger ship that they're trying to correct. And I think again, not I don't think it's the fault of the companies, right? Because I just recently signed up for a Jira account, and I'm like, I got piped straight into that team managed project. And I'm like, wait, how did I even get here? Because I did not want to land here. And so that's probably the first biggest mistake.
Yeah, it's very hard to migrate later, and it just pain in the ass, to be honest. To I actually don't know why they're doing team managed projects, because this is such a scaled down version that, I mean, at the end, you will not find a lot of benefit long term for it. Like I haven't seen any company that would go team managed project route and succeeded. To be honest, I don't know. Maybe you have seen some, but I haven't seen any.
I haven't e I haven't either, but, my logic for why they do it is because you get companies like Monday.com who are running all these ads are basically saying, "My team got started in minutes," and so it takes weeks to properly set up a real Jira software company managed project, right? Because you gotta really architect your workflows, custom fields, your columns, your boards, yeah, right? There's a lot of tweaks to get it just right, and those team managed ones, you're just in. You get in a few minutes, and I think that's where that I would assume that that's where that pressure is coming in, just looking from the outside in.
So if you're listening, the biggest tip for you: don't fall for team managed projects, always choose company managed projects, and this will serve you long term for sure. Um, Amazing. So you got a lot of Jira questions over the years you're working, and you have an amazing YouTube channel. What are some of the most common one that people ask you, and if you can give some tips around them?
That's such an interesting question because I usually tell the teams that I work with that I don't ever get 2 questions asked. I've never have gotten like there's like the basic ones of like how do you add a custom field to the screen and like how do you like add a status to a workflow, right? But that's just so basic. But when you get into like the more like a real significant question, no two people have ever in my 7 years have asked me basically the same question. So this just goes to show like just how customizable and how raw Jira can be, right? It's like, um, I mean, they're very similar, right? Somebody will ask me about like story points and but there's so many variations of it, right? No two people are asking me the same question. So I got like somebody asking me like, how do you roll them up to the epic? I got another person asking me, how do you roll up the subtask to the epic? And I got another person like asking me, how do you change it from story points to original estimate, right? And so like everybody's ever just so slightly different. Even though I get hundreds and hundreds of these questions asked, every question is just like subtly different, which makes answering these questions challenging because you really got to pay attention to the question because just a little comma in the wrong place is going to drastically change that answer. But I would say again, the most common, the most basic stuff is just the basics, right? Like field configurations, screen, adding issues to screens, and but I think probably the one I would like to answer it in this way: the one where more people are most grateful, right? Where they're like, "This saved my butt," is on the how to make fields required. I think most people really get confused with that field configuration and just go and make a field required in Jira and then end up breaking Jira for a lot of people. And so I have probably one of my more popular videos is like, "Hey, here's how you set up your required field so that you don't botch everything up and bring Jira to its knees," right? But that would probably be the one where it's asked a lot, but also I get a lot of feedback in the comments saying like, "Oh man, this just saved my butt because I was totally gonna mess this up."
So if we unpack that a bit, because people will be like, um, so people will be like asking, okay, Alex need to tell me more about this because I don't want to bring Jira to my knees. So what is the downside of this problem? Like what exactly happens if you don't make, let's say, a field requirement?
Yes. So every Jira project, when you click the create project, it's really interesting what happens. Workflows, issue types, and screens are all unique to the project. So they have the project name, the key, and then the workflow or the screen or the issue type. But the field configuration, the pool that holds all the fields, those are carbon copied. It's the same field configuration for every project. And so what happens is you'll get a team that they go into their screens and they make like they have a special custom field like I don't know. I always use dumb names like favorite color, right? But they'll go and make a custom field, totally left field. Nobody else is going to use it in the company. And they go to the field configuration and make it required. Well, guess what? Nobody else is going to have a favorite color field in their screens. But because they did it on the main default field configuration, now any other team, when they go to hit create for anything, they're stuck. They can't make it because that field's missing. It's missing from the screen, and only the one team that put it on the screen can actually use it. But everybody else comes to a halt because you can't. It's a required field that doesn't exist.
That's a good point. Thank you. I that's actually a really good tip. I've seen that many times myself as well.
Yeah, I like to call it my fireable offense. I like to tell people that if I catch you doing it, you're getting fired if you're working for me. That's not a mistake you want to be making.
The one question I get asked a lot, and I think that is related to how Jira sort of works, and I'm not a big fan of this particular thing. The workflows, when people try to edit their workflow and they see that they cannot edit it um, because it's already active, and they're just like, then you have to go through some hoops to have a new workflow or at least to edit the workflow. You have to make a copy, then you have to assign it to a screen. Just like a bunch of things you have to do that. What's your view on that? Do you think that done well? There's a reason for that, or you would love to see it differently?
I would like for Atlassian to handle it the way they handle the publishing of the workflow. So, for example, when you remove a status from the workflow, you can't remove the status from an active workflow. So this is going to require you to make a copy, go into the copy, make your change, and then reapply the workflow to the project, and then you publish it. And when you publish it, Jira's like, "Hey, you removed something. It's not here anymore. Where is it?" And it forces you in the UI to basically translate for Jira, right? Where you're like, "I used to be this. Give me the new value that I need to be," right? And I think that I don't understand why we can't just get to that publish screen and kind of do like an audit, like a review of like, here's what changed. Was this intentional? Right? I don't get why we have to do the copies and do the reapplications and everything, right? It's like I almost feel like when you hit that publish button, it should be smart enough to go, okay, this is not allowed, this is allowed, veto this or allow that or confirm this, right? Like there should be some logical screen there that I think would make life easier because yeah, it's super annoying. Super annoying to do this over and over and over and over and over.
I completely agree. So one thing that you touched on that many people also ask me about is estimation. And how does estimation work in Jira? So I want to. It's like a two-sided question. The bigger question is estimation. What's your view on? Some people do estimate, some people don't estimate. Story points, hours, and the other question is how well do you think Jira handles that?
So I'll answer the easy one, which is how well does Jira handle it? I think story points and estimating are built into Jira really well. The way you see it when you're doing it in the backlog, right? Very recently, thankfully, Atlassian now allows you to do inline editing of the story points in the backlog without having to open the issue. So that to me is just beautiful that you can do that now. And so I think from just a Jira perspective, well executed. I think there's room for improvement, right? I think there's some room for improvement. Like you can't do capacity planning in Jira. You can't like Microsoft Azure DevOps or the DevOps Azure DevOps Online or whatever they call it, right? ADO. That one you can go for each team member and like say these team members are gonna have 50 points each, and then you
Yeah,
can kind of do some capacity plan there. So I wish that was there in Jira. But other than that, I think that's my only real complaint is just like if you use the story points, Jira does it well. Mine is the capacity planning. But to answer the harder question, like how do you use the story points?
yeah,
Um, I like to tell people that I think story points and estimating in general is just one of the more controversial things in the world of agile, really. Because when you go out there, right, and you do a Google search of like how do you estimate stories, there's no shortage of articles. But I have yet to find an article that tells you how to estimate. They tell you how to think about estimating, but nobody gives you like an example of
yeah,
like how to do it. And I think that's really challenging, right? For new people. It's easy to say, well, a one is this value as a baseline, and a two is twice as hard, and a three is twice as hard as that, and a five is twice as hard as that previous one. And so it's so easy to just say these things, but most people what I find, right? Because even in my examples, like my favorite color from earlier, right? A lot of people are like, I don't understand that. Like, they don't see the correlation between the example that is very ambiguous to their daily real world situations, right? Like to the problems that they have to actually deal with in their work environment. And
yeah,
so I think one of the biggest frustrations that I have then, right, is that again, we just don't have enough information out there for what is good estimating versus bad estimating with concrete examples, right? We have plenty of like the theory of estimating, but nobody puts their neck out and says, this is how you should estimate. So I did that once. I did a video on how to do it. And I stuck my neck out and boy did it hurt.
yeah,
But what I like to tell people, right, is here's what I will tell you. What I tell people is don't treat it as hours, right? You're developing software. Software is like an art. You can't. A lot of people think that software engineering is like building a building or building a boat or something concrete, right? Something with a finite. Here's a start. Here's a finish, and we're just gonna build it, right? But software isn't that. It's like more of an infinite game. And I think a lot of people struggle with this because they have real budgets and real schedules, and you can't like it. I always tell people it's like you would never have asked like Picasso when he was gonna finish the Mona Lisa, and you would never have asked Picasso to like estimate him making the Mona Lisa, right? Like that would have just
that's
been
a
like
good
so far
one.
fetched because it's an art, right? It's an iterative process that requires learning. It's more of a journey. There is no destination here, right? And so I think a lot of teams struggle with the story points because they want to turn it into measurable, finite. Here's when we're gonna finish, but
Yeah,
you can't. And so I think
and
a lot of teams get in trouble there.
yeah, most of the time when I go to teams, especially at bigger companies, and they use story points, I'm like, interesting. I'm sure it's gonna be fun conversation. And usually it's
Yeah.
like I'm like, so what does those story points mean? And almost every time I get answer, well, just 8 hours is 8 story points. I'm like,
Yeah.
so why are not using hours? Why are you using story points? There's hours for that. Like, why are you confusing yourself? And then they're like, I don't know.
I don't
We
know.
just
Yeah,
started.
I like to tell people like it's so easy to define a one and so easy to define like a 13 or 21, right? Because I like to tell people like, look, if I ask you to and I've learned that this doesn't translate well outside the United States. So I'm not sure where your audience is, but we'll see where it goes. You'll have to let me know what the feedback is. But here in the United States, like when you're like a little kid and you're learning how to cook for yourself, like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, which is two pieces of bread and some dressings on top of them, that is a staple. Just it takes 2 seconds to make, and this is like the first thing you learn how to do, right?
Yeah,
Versus like a gourmet meal that requires hours and hours of prep work, right? And so I always tell people, I'm like, look, you gotta look at a story because any task, anything that you gotta do, you as the individual that needs to do that work in your gut, you should be able to feel, I can do this with my eyes closed, or I have no freaking clue where to even start. And that should define your easy and your hard story points. And everything in between, then you kind of just help your team kind of figure out, do we need to break it down or do we just need a little bit more help, right? And I think that's how usually how I like to so I'm very much, my opinions of story points are more like on the t-shirt sizing, right? Where you give like a level of effort from like is it easy, or is it kind of easy, or is it like easy but I'm gonna stress a little bit? And I think people can relate to those, and they usually, when I coach them like that, they usually have a much easier time using
Yeah,
story points because they're using their gut, right, to make a decision, and not logical like, well, this is an 8-hour task, because no it's not.
yeah.
You think it is, but no it's not.
Also, for me, sort of the issue with hours that I find the most is that in an ideal world, the team picks up the tasks, the issues, the stories. So if I'm a junior developer and you're a senior developer, and I say as a junior developer, it's 8 hours for me and it's 2 hours for you, now we are in trouble because, well, now we cannot take more stories if our
Right.
velocity is like, I don't know, 100 hours.
Yeah.
But if we say it's relatively hard, so it's maybe 5 points, then me and you are comfortable. So I don't have to press you to do it in 2 hours. You don't have to like wait for 8 hours. So we are in a much better spot. So I think that's where story points power is, that if anybody can pick up the task, we all agree that for us as a team, this is complexity and how much time it would take in one sort of number. And I think that's a power. Because if there's no power, if it's 8 hours, always 8 hours, there's no need to have any other numbers. Um, so
Yeah, it's just a vanity
that's why
metric
I
at
like
that
story
point, right?
points. Yeah, yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, no, I
All
worked
right.
on a team once where they bid the contract by the story points. So at the end of the day, it didn't matter what your story points were because they had to add up to that final number. I'm like, why? There's no
Yeah,
value in using points at that time. But
yeah,
man, this is why I
exactly.
wish I can run my own company someday.
Well, I'm sure you will. With your track record, I won't be surprised next time we talk. You're gonna be running everything. Um, so the other sort of the controversial, I don't know if it's controversial, but I have a lot of issues with that with many clients, and I think a lot of people misunderstand it. Subtasks. What's your view on subtasks? Do you think they work well? Not well? How do you see them in Jira?
I'll answer them the similar way that we did the last question, right? So I'll answer the easy part, right? Which is, does Jira do subtasks well? No. Subtasks can use a lot of improvements in Jira because they don't show up on your backlog, so you're kind of operating blindly, right? The team managed projects at least give you a little indicator that there's a subtask. I wish company managed projects had that, right? But you don't really know until you either click on it or you show up on the board and they're your subtasks, right? So I think from an execution perspective, Atlassian's got a lot of work here with their subtasks. I just don't think that they're. I personally try to avoid them. I'm not a big fan of the subtasks. Now, what do I tell people about the subtasks, right? Because a lot of people, the common occurrence that I've seen is when they make a story, and the reason why they feel compelled to use a subtask is because they're like, well, the story is so broad that they're playing like a relay race, right? Where one person does their part, and then it goes to the next person, and then it goes to the next person. But then I'm like, well, how do you estimate that when you got four different people working on the same thing? And they're like, well, that's what we use the subtasks. I'm like, but they're called story points. They go on the story.
Yes.
And so my number one tip is I give folks a two-part tip, right? Which is one, if you feel like you're having to do a relay race with your story, it means you need to make four stories, one for each stretch. Group them together with the epic, group them together with something else, components, whatever you want. But you need four smaller stories that are estimatable now by the four people that are actually going to do the work, right? And
Yeah.
two, I tell people that the subtasks, I don't ban them, right? I'm not against them, but they should be more like a checklist for that person that is going to do the work. Just like reminders, right? It's not anything that the team needs to plan or estimate. It's more like a how-to little like, again, just a little checklist that tells that individual like, okay, just don't make sure you forget these five things that you got to do. And
Yeah.
when I think they stick to that, I tend to be more okay with subtasks.
Beautiful. Yeah, I'm not a big fan.
What do you think of my
And
controversial answer?
I love your answer. I love your answer. And Yeah, I'm not a big fan for many reasons, but what I usually see is the story sits in a board if it's a Scrum. With Kanban, I'm sort of more lenient towards subtasks. Still don't like them, but in Scrum, I see stories with like hundreds of
But that's
subtasks, and
because
I'm like,
that's because Kanban shows them.
yes,
But
yes.
that's because the Kanban shows them to you, right? So they're actually a little bit more usable. But in Scrum, forget about it.
And Kanban, you don't bound by sprints, so in theory, you might take a little longer time if your backlog is small to sort of work on it, which I also, again, I don't recommend. If somebody's listening and like, oh, now in Kanban I should do subtasks. No, but at least if I see lots of story with like 20 subtasks in Scrum, I'm getting very stressed out. If I see it in Kanban, I'm getting less stressed out, but I'm like, okay, let's talk about it. In Scrum,
Yeah,
I usually say, just don't use subtasks, just because they need to be fast and you need to see the progress. And when you have like stories sitting there for lots of subtasks, like this doesn't help anybody. You're just demotivated because, oh, I need to like finish 20 things to finish one thing. No, just split it up into split it up into 20 things and complete them separately and be happy. Um,
yeah.
yeah,
It's
so
it's tough. Like this whole agile business is really, really tough. It really does require like you can't be passive with agile. I think a lot of people are like, let's just come together for a few ceremonies. We'll get a plan together and then go and do it. It works if your team really is self-organizing. I think those agile founders were onto something when they said it has to be a self-organizing team. But my experience has shown me that people don't self-organize. Like they, if it's not explicitly like in their front of their face or like on top of mind, like they'll forget about it. They'll get busy or they just don't care. Right? A developer
yeah,
wants to write code. They want to just write code. They don't care if it's the right code, the wrong code. They just want to write code, and you really do need someone that is almost like babying the projects, right? Because it requires a lot of follow-ups. It requires a lot of interactions. It requires a lot of coordination, right? And it just if somebody if somebody's not doing it and you're just putting things into Jira and hoping that the tool's gonna fix your problems, like
yeah,
you're gonna be in for a rude awakening there too.
that's true. The other interesting part of Jira that makes it pretty complicated, and the questions I'm getting asked is grouping. There's so many ways to group things. You can group subtasks in a story. You can group stories in an epic. You have components. You have versions releases. So what's your view on how do you there's also advanced roadmaps and then you have initiatives whole bunch of different things, so what's your template on how you group things and in which scenarios you prefer to use certain grouping mechanisms of Jira?
Yeah. So I'm a huge top-down person, right? I'm a huge start at the macro level and kind of work your way down. And so where I usually start off is like at a roadmap, right? Is like what's our deadlines look like, right? What does this calendar look like? And so once I kind of establish it's a six, we're dealing with 6 months, 12 months, whatever it is, then I'm like, okay, so working with like product managers and stuff of that nature is like, okay, so what capabilities are we gonna want to build here? Right? What is it that we're trying to build? What features are going to be shipped, right? And so I'm trying to capture these, typically because of again the way Atlassian's set up, and they are fixing it, but they've been fixing it for over a year. I like to start off at the initiative level, so most of my teams are Jira Premium or up, so that we do have access to create initiatives above the epic issue types above the epic. And so I start there, very big picture, and go, okay, so here's a 6 month initiative. What are the key functionalities? What do we want to deliver in this, right? And so those become my epics. So I have 4 or 5 different epics, and we're like, okay, so here's release one, here's release two. Which epic's going to release one? Which epic's going to release two? Right. From there, then I'm working with my technical teams to decompose those epics down to the stories, right? So we figure out, okay, so what is it actually? What's it going to take to make these features become a reality? Right. And then now this is where the negotiation starts, right? This is where they like we had a plan, but once we like start peeling the layers back, you're like, oh man, this is harder or this is way more work because your product managers don't always like your road mappers, your stakeholders, they don't always have the insight to foresee complexities and technologies, and again, it's an art that you're building here, right? And so this is kind of where you need a strong like scrum master, a strong project manager to really negotiate and kind of keep the balance of like, here's what we want to deliver, but here's what we can actually achieve. And so once we kind of have all that stuff out, then I'm prioritizing things. So I'm grouping by priority. So I'm going, what's got to go, right? What's non-negotiable? What's nice to have? What can kind of, if there's time, right? So I'm grouping. Well, I wouldn't say I'm grouping, but I'm labeling by the priority, right? Obviously, we have our epics. We know which epics are going to go into which release, and we know the priorities of the releases, right? So I'm leveraging those epics and the releases alongside with the actual priority field, obviously ranking my backlog. And then components, right? So components is a huge aspect of it, because what I like to tell people is your components should be each block inside your architecture diagram. So as you're trying to figure out what it is, the capabilities that you want to build and deliver, those capabilities are going to touch aspects of your architecture. And so you should know which parts of your architecture are going to need to be working in order for the functionality that you're promising to work. And so again, so we're using a combination of all these together in harmony to then paint a picture of like, this is what's going to go into a sprint if we have any chance to succeed here.
So the other question people have usually, there's also ways to group with labels. So some people say, why would I use components? I can just use labels for that. What would you tell them?
I got a strong opinion on this one. I hate labels. So I'll start there. Hate is a strong word, but no. In all seriousness, right? So I like to tell people components because one, they're not immutable, right? Like the label is going to be mutable in the sense that plural versus singular is going to be two different labels, right? If you put in a dash, it's going to be a different label. If you misspell the word, it's going to be a different label, right? Obviously, they're not case sensitive, so big uppercase, lowercase are all they're gonna work. That's going to be the same label, but there's a lot of user error on the label side, right? On the component side, you got more control because you can go and define them. You can assign an owner, because remember, the way I architect my components is it belongs to a box, and there's better be a subject matter expert that knows that box on that team, right? And
Yeah,
so now I can own it. I can give them ownership, and I can go, "You're responsible for this component. You own this piece of the architecture, right?" And then obviously then they're still going to work, right? There's still a drop down, but the most important thing I think is, since I don't like labels, the only other alternative other than components is to use a custom field. But custom fields then require you to be talking to your Jira admins, right? Because you
yeah,
just can't add values to your components. I mean, to custom fields. So I like using the components because it's a great alternative to essentially have some control over the values dynamically if you need to add over time, which you don't get with the custom field unless you're an admin.
it's a very good point. Yeah, actually, components, and I love how the components represent parts of the diagram. I try to look at it the same way. I find not too many teams do use components. Um, I guess just because it's another layer. I mean, my usual approach is when teams don't know anything about Jira, I try to keep it as simple as possible. So I would just say, let's first learn what's a story, what's an epic, and then we slowly start to add more layers to it. But when you plan ahead and it's like a clean slate, I think what you're saying, um, it's very good. That's definitely the way to go.
Yeah,
That's
the
amazing.
hard part is keeping everybody accountable though, because I made so many plans before, and
Yeah,
it's just like I said, the people part is really the most challenging part, because you all gotta be on a high performance team that really wants this,
yeah,
right? Because if every player that's on that team is, if any one person on that team is just like, well, I'm just here for the paycheck, the whole process goes out the window, man. Like everybody's got to have skin in the game. Everybody's got to like wake up and just be excited about whatever it is they're building, because then everything else falls into its own place because they
yes,
care. But when
yeah.
they don't care and it's just a job, then it's just hard for everybody.
That's actually a good segue because I agree with you. I spend most of my time these days. We have a team of amazing Jira administrators. So most of my time is spent on this, on making sure that people get excited and get motivated. And yeah, that's often very, very hard. So, what do you use? I mean, what techniques do you use? What advices, approaches do you use to get people more accountable, on the same page, and excited about doing the process?
Yeah, so my biggest thing, at least the thing that works for me the most, is starting with why. I don't know if you've ever read Simon Sinek's book, Start with
Yeah,
Why. It's pretty big
yeah,
here in
yeah,
the
very
US.
good.
And it's just an important book, right? Because like a team, right? I think what helps this whole thing out is like I never played sports, but I appreciate sports a whole lot more now that I'm in Agile, right? And I just feel like a team, when they're focused on a mission, right? When they all buy into like why they're here, right? Like they have a direct line of sight to my action here, my decisions that I make, or lack of decisions that I make or don't make, right? How they impact the whole thing. Like these your folks, your team, they have to rally. They have to be behind a purpose and a mission. And I'll give you a great example. I used to work on a team about 5 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, right? Right, maybe about a year before COVID hit. And this project was 3 years behind schedule. And
Wow.
it was just like it was a project that nobody wanted to touch. It was just a money pit. It was costing the company so many millions of dollars, right? Nobody wanted to touch it. And they brought in this chief engineer, and this chief engineer had been around at the beginning of the program like 20 years prior. And he got us into a room one time, and he's like, the stuff that you guys are building today, the last time that there was a group of people in one room thinking about this product was 20 years ago when they made the first design for this aircraft. Today, this moment is the second version of this aircraft, and it's the second time in history that people are getting together to do something impactful that's going to be used for the next 20 years. After that day, after he gave us like, holy moly, like we're gonna shape this thing for the next 20 years speak, like everything flipped on us, right? Like everybody just like hyped up and they were ready to go because they're like, wow, this is cool. Like the impact that you're gonna have, the value of the mission that we're gonna have, like it was night and day. And so I think that's kind of where I come from. Is like start with why, start with like showing your team where's the value, right? And what happens when they get their skin in the game.
Yeah, one of the biggest issues I see uh, is more like management level than a team level. There is I mean, I'm pretty good, I would say very good at getting to the team and make team excited and set up the process and get teams going. The roadblock to me most of the time in a bigger companies is bureaucracy and management levels. Somebody says we're gonna do it, then the other guy says we're not gonna do it, then the other guy says we're gonna do it. And so because the
Egos
priority is
suck.
shifting so much, yeah, uh, because the priority shifts so much, uh, whatever you decide today, tomorrow will be overwritten. And for people, this is when they lose hope because they're like, why would we even start? Why do we even try anything when we are not decision makers here? Our voices are not heard. And that's, I think, is to me the biggest roadblock towards a good development team. And I'm not talking about startups. Startups are much easier, but startups has other issues like, okay, we want to do this, we don't have funding now, we're not going to do this. So they
Yeah,
have on
we're
a
out of
different
money.
level.
Yeah.
Yes, but the bigger organization that actually shape the world and they can have a biggest impact, the one that call me at least, and I'm the guy when shit hits a fan at the biggest level, when everybody's leaving and there's like craziest thing, then when they call me. So when I come, I usually it's the same thing. There's no direct communication. You cannot communicate to a person above the other person, and there's always somebody coming in and just ruining the
Dude,
process.
this is a topic you don't even want to get me started on it because we can talk about it for hours. But my whole career, I've been an engineer for the last 10, 11 years, and every job I've ever had, it's always the same thing. And I think that's probably the most demotivating thing, period, right? It's one of the reasons why. So I used to work at this really big defense contractor here in the US, moved to another defense contractor, same story. And then I learned a lot of techniques in that second defense contractor I was in. Remember that program I told you on I was on that was 3 years behind schedule? Well, they brought in a tiger team. They brought in a team of specialists that were so like tight knit, right? They'd work together. And there was one of every engineering discipline. There was a superb software engineer, superb electrical, superb tester, superb everything that you needed to basically run a program. And they turned that ship around by themselves. There was 7 people
Yeah.
and they were able to do the work of 200
Yeah,
because
just need a few. Yes.
yeah, yeah. But I learned how they operated because I got to be like helping them, turn the whole thing around. But none of my opinions mattered, right? Because when it came down to it, it was like, again, the same bureaucracy, the same like the directors of the VPs of whatever. Nothing that I ever did at that company was ever going to matter. And so I went to a startup thinking it would be different, but bringing my techniques. But then I was seen as too aggressive, right? I was seen as
Mm.
like, we don't do. I remember my first day on that startup, my manager was like, we don't do meetings here. I'm like, how
Yeah.
the heck do you coordinate yourself then? Like everybody just does whatever you want. And
Yeah.
chaos, I learned chaos in startups is really what kills the startups, right? Because they have this mentality of like, we just got to move fast. I'm like, dude, but you're moving yourself fast into the ground. Like
Yeah.
you gotta figure like you just can't go to war. You gotta have a plan, right? And so I see that all the time though, like just coming back to the bigger companies, right? Where just you have these my biggest observation has been managers are afraid of their managers
Yes.
because
100%.
the job is on the line. You're
Yeah.
afraid. I can't tell you how many meetings I've heard of a like a CIO or a vice president or senior vice president make a comment, not even a mandate, but just make a comment and spend 2 3 weeks the rest of the team trying to figure out what the heck did he mean by that comment. And
Yeah.
I one time said, "Why can't we just ask for clarification?" They're like, "No, no, no, we can't do that." I'm like, well, "Why wouldn't you ask for clarification instead of spending 3 weeks trying
But
to
that's a
guess?"
culture. Yeah, that's how they build a culture. Unfortunately, um, what I do, and I don't know if it helps anybody, so I'm gonna share a quick my strategy. First of all, I always say I need to talk to the highest people on the chain and get them to agree to that. So unless I can do that, most of the time we don't take contracts. And when we do, I say, all I want you to do is to decide what you're doing and don't change it for 4 months. I'm going to work with a team, give me 1 or 2 teams. And if you see the results, then we can continue if you have trust in me. So I usually go, I do my work. They see that the teams we take probably outperform anybody else in there just by the nature if you follow the process and people are motivated in the place where nobody else cares. You just go, and then when everybody else see that, then they're like, okay, we want that. I'm like, if you want that, there's one rule: you're not changing your priorities for 4 months. Once you're ready for that, come to me. And it's like it's very upfront and aggressive, but sometimes to wake people up, you need that kick. You need to say,
Yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah,
this
that
this
reminds me a lot of
approach,
like
the only one that works for me.
yeah. Have you read Jocko Willink's Extreme Ownership?
Yeah, yeah, it's a good book as well.
Yeah, because 'cause I'm like that gave me a lot of extreme ownership vibes, right? Where you can't mess around with the small fish, right? Like if you want change and if you want to do things right, like you gotta have top down support. It's gotta be at the top and it's gotta come down from up there so you
Yes,
have that top coverage because otherwise everybody's too scared, right? Everybody's too not wanting to be vulnerable to the change.
100%.
But so many
Um,
companies rather not do anything. It's
yeah,
just a
yeah, yeah,
it's just a political game. You just
yeah.
survive.
We went to deep waters, but I think it's important
Uh,
for people who actually starting this career to understand what to expect. And I have 2 more questions. I have one question, and then we're gonna go to Jira tip. So the question I'm asked a lot, I think it's one of the most common questions you can find from being Agile and Scrum Master. So for somebody who doesn't have any experience working in Agile, being a Scrum Master or being an Agile coach, and they want to get there, they want to get a job, they want to start working in this field, what would be your advice?
that is a really, really hard question to answer because I get that question a lot. And everything we've just discussed over the last 20, 30 minutes, you can't teach that stuff. You
Yes,
can't go and take a certified political framework class and learn how company politics work, right? And so my recommendation to people in these situations where they want to become an agile coach, or they want to, become scrum masters or whatever, but they just say like, well, I don't have the experience, right? And I don't know how to get the experience. The beautiful thing about what we just talked about is that this drama exists everywhere, in every field, not just in tech, not just in engineering, right? It happens in nursing and marketing and accounting, law school, everywhere, right? And so what I typically tell people is learn the methodology and the mindset of agile, right? Because that is teachable, right? The values of what agile is. And then spend time looking where you volunteer or where you work, or find a place to volunteer, right? And figure out a way to apply the principles of agile in that environment, because it'll give you first rate exposure to then thinking like an agilist, right? It'll give you exposure, even if you're not, again, in an engineering job, or even if you're not doing proper scrums or proper anything, right? People have work to do, right? We all get paid everywhere around the world. People get paid to do something, and somebody's got to be the ringleader. Somebody's got to orchestrate it, right? So take on that role in whatever environment you're in today, right? Again, whether you got to volunteer somewhere, right? Go to the Red Cross, do something. I will tell you, I don't know if we mentioned this, right? But a few years ago in my church, we did like a drive where we had to pack backpacks, and they allocated 4 hours for this activity to put things into these backpacks and give them to these teachers. And I saw a group of people just flood the floor, and like people were just waiting to get stuff from the table. And then they would come back and then go, oh crap, we forgot something. They go back, grab something, come back and go and come back, go and come back. An hour later, they had a backpack. So I went and stopped everybody, formed two lines, organized took everything out of the boxes, put it all in a row, and then I put one person on each station to just hand out. And it was a
Beautiful.
production line. So I made a production line, right? So I
Yes.
took the principles of lean that I learned and I applied them, and we got done in 2 hours. And it was so quick that the lady was like, huh, we don't even know what to do with the extra time, because this has never happened before where we
Yes.
finished early. Right. But it's these things where, like, never in a million years that I think that some class that I took at my graduate level studies was I going to apply at a volunteer activity.
Yeah.
Right.
And
But
it's so
I
easy
got
when
real
you
world
think about it.
experience there. So that,
It's
that would
so
be my tip, right?
yeah.
Find a way to simulate the environment so that you can practice, because it's only going to
Beautiful.
come with practice.
Beautiful. And I love how it's so intuitive once you have awareness about it. But what, like, just looking at like how people work, I think observation is very important for people who are starting out. Just observe and just ask people what doesn't work, and then figure out with them how to make it work. Here is the easiest way for you to apply principle of being more efficient. Just find out what doesn't
Yeah.
work.
Yeah,
And
it doesn't even have to be agile, just like literally be better.
yes,
How to make things better, efficiency, right?
or
It's just
even at your own level, what I'm saying to people, well, find out where you're inefficient and figure out how to be more efficient. Create a board, put some tickets on a board that's like your daily tasks, and make sure that you move them. There's so easy to do because it applies anywhere, as you said. I love it.
yeah. Yeah, like nurses and stuff, right? Everybody's got responsibilities, right? Put up a whiteboard, put some stickies on a whiteboard, put some names next to them, put some statuses, and you got yourself a Kanban board.
Yes.
You're ready to go.
We did that for hospitals as well. Yeah, exactly that. And it changed everything, which was very, very rewarding. So let's get to the last part, which is one Jira tip. It can be anything, but I would love to hear something that is not that commonly known, but makes big difference for you or for your clients. Anything you can share.
Yeah, putting me on the spot. So I would say a big tip. I don't. Some teams do this, not a whole lot that I work with, right? But importing issues is very tricky. Um, Coming in from like Asana, coming in from Trello, right? And my biggest tip, because I've done hundreds and hundreds of imports, is take the time to really groom your data, really groom your Excel file that you're going to be porting in, right? Because there is trial and error, which is going to work, right? But my biggest tip is import your epics first. do the top down, because once the epics exist in your file, then the linkage to the stories in the file is going to be easier. Same thing goes with the subtasks, right? If you're going to be importing subtasks, do them in a linear order where all your epics are front loaded, and then all your stories, and then all your subtasks. That way, all the linkages in your columns later, they all will map out to each other, and the parent will already exist, and so all the children will fall naturally into that parent, right?
Beautiful.
And so that's my biggest tip of like, be methodical. Don't just like import stuff, because I think a lot of teams just like import things and then they get sad because they're like, oh, it didn't work. And then they're
Yes.
just trying this and they're trying that. And I'm like, all you gotta do is just be very methodical, right? And then another thing is, make sure that your date format, if you're bringing in dates, make sure that those formats in your CSV file align with the format that you're dictating in Jira when you're doing the import. Because if they're not, they're gonna default to like some 1969 date, and nobody wants that either, right? So you're gonna want to make sure that they're the same, because then the dates will come in, right? But a lot of people are just like, oh, it didn't work, or this is buggy, or this is annoying. My recommendation is take the time, practice, right? Above all, practice with one row. Get that
Yes.
going. Make sure you get all the data in, and then scale out. Because I think too many people try to bring in 1,000 issues at a time, and they're like, well, this didn't work out very well.
Yes.
And just learn.
Amazing.
So that would be my pro tip on importing. It's tough, it's challenging, it's annoying, but with some practice, it gets easier.
Beautiful. Well, thank you for coming. Thank you for sharing your knowledge. I follow you and I really appreciate what you're doing for the community. I love your channel. Please, people, go check out ApeTech tutorials. Really, really good. And yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you for having me. It was a pleasure, and we're gonna have to have a Agile 2.0 conversation, or
100%.
maybe
Yeah.
just high performance teams leadership. I don't know.
Yes.
I'm trying to pivot one day into less
That's
Jira and more people problems.
yeah. That's my area of expertise these days. And yeah, would love to chat more about that. So, you guys will definitely see Alex again here. And have a good one. And bye bye.